Louis XV was only 5 years old when his great-grandfather Louis XIV, known as Louis the Great, passed away after ruling the French Empire for 72 years and 110 days, a reign longer than any monarch of any sovereign country in recorded history. The year was 1715, and all-powerful France was close to financial ruin. The reason for their precarious fiscal position was quite simple. Louis the Great had, for the past 7 decades, been lavishly spending on a variety of things, ranging from numerous personal luxuries to extravagant public works. His reign was characteristic of the age of absolutism in Europe, and the king was constantly surrounding himself with a variety of significant military, political, and cultural figures. As a supporter of the notion of the divine right of kings, Louis XV continued his predecessor's work in establishing a centralized state governing from the capital. In his work to eliminate what was still left of feudalism, he went so far as to compel many members of the nobility to take up residence at the Palace of Versailles. This served to pacify the aristocracy. Louis also established uniformity of religion within France, whereby the French Catholic Church became the only religion allowed. This spelled disaster for the Huguenot Protestant minority, causing them to lose their rights which had been previously established under the Edict of Nantes. They were also subject to the authority of the Dragonauds, which was a government policy involving the forced billeting of both dragoons and infantrymen in the households of recalcitrant Protestants, with instructions to harass and intimidate the occupants in order to persuade them to either convert to state Catholicism or emigrate. By these means, he became one of the most powerful French monarchs of all time, and managed to consolidate a system of absolute monarchy which endured until the French Revolution. Throughout Louis XIV's long reign, France emerged as the preeminent European power, both in military might and cultural achievements. During his rule, France was involved in 3 major continental conflicts: the Franco-Dutch War, the War of the League of Augsburg, and the War of the Spanish Succession. Outside of war, Louis's reign produced several significant achievements, including the construction of the Canal du Midi, the creation of the Palace and Gardens of Versailles, the sponsorship and patronage of such artists and composers as Jean-Baptiste de Lally, Molière, and Hyacinthe Rigaud, as well as the founding of the French Academy of Sciences, among other things. The achievements under the governance of Louis XIV are, to be sure, both impressive and remarkable, yet they came at an enormous cost, a cost which was borne not by Louis, but by the common man and all those yet to come into the world. Such marvels and conquests were enormously expensive, and in order to sustain such lavish spending that in a large way allowed France to become the epicenter of Western civilization, the government was obligated to run massive budget deficits each year, causing a steady increase in the French national debt. By the time Louis took the throne, the French treasury was spending more than 80% of its entire tax revenue just to pay interest on the debt. Being only 5 years old, Louis XV was too young to do anything upon inheriting these disastrous circumstances. However, his regents wasted no time in calling an emergency meeting to cut spending. Military spending was gutted, public benefits were slashed, and even the royal household had its budget cut. Although government spending was reined in, this must be taken in its proper context. Compared to his predecessor, the government of Louis XV had taken necessary, though unwelcome, austerity measures. It was clear to anyone that continuing down the same road of unfettered spending on what were mostly unproductive and useless ventures was simply impossible. Action had to be taken, and indeed it was, though such measures came too little and too late. By any reasonable estimate, the government was still heading down the same path of unfeasible deficit spending, whereby the future was unwittingly sacrificed for the present. For these reasons, most historians are generally critical of his reign. They often cite how reports of his corruption humiliated the monarchy, while his foreign wars in Europe and North America drained the treasury while achieving little. His grandson and successor, Louis XVI, would inherit a kingdom truly in need of financial and political reform, which would ultimately lead to the infamous French Revolution of 1789. Economic reality, as well as common moral outrage and fierce resentment, would sweep over the nation in a fury unlike anything France had ever known.